"You're the responsible one, Emily. You're lucky enough to help." That sentence had followed Emily Walker around like a shadow since she was 21. Now at 31, living in a quiet corner of Seattle and working as a financial analyst, Emily had built a stable life with her own two hands, no shortcuts, no bailouts. Her condo paid with years of sacrifice, her spotless credit earned not gifted. Every piece of furniture, every line on her resume reflected discipline and grit. But in her family's eyes, it was just proof she could afford to fix what they broke. Her younger brother, Jesse, 3 years her junior, had always been the fragile one or so her parents claimed. Charming, impulsive, and perpetually in a crisis, Jesse had a habit of falling apart and letting others pick up the pieces. And her parents, Carl and Lorraine, never once held him accountable. Instead, they turned to Emily. A tuition payment here, a car loan, co-sign there, thousands to cover overdue bills, all swept under the rug without so much as a thank you. Emily wasn't cruel or distant. She just stopped volunteering to be everyone's emergency contact. In her family, love wasn't unconditional, it was transactional. And when she began saying no, they didn't see it as setting boundaries. They saw it as betrayal. But Emily was done carrying the weight of everyone else's chaos, and for the first time, she was starting to see that maybe responsibility wasn't a life sentence. Emily Walker had learned to recognize the signs, the brittle cheer in her mother's voice, the sudden silence from her father, the way her brother Jesse sat smug and unbothered, scrolling on his phone like a teenager with no responsibilities. It was a Sunday evening at the family home in Vancouver, Washington. Just another dinner, at least on the surface. Emily drove in from Seattle, like she did every so often, mostly out of obligation. She wasn't expecting warmth, not anymore. She was expecting a script, one she wasn't given the chance to rewrite. Dinner had barely made it to the second course when Lorraine, her mother, gently placed her fork down and laced her fingers like she was about to pray. "Emily," she said, voice sticky sweet and soft enough to mask what was coming. "Jesse's had a rough go of it lately. He just needs a little help getting back on his feet. So we've decided he's going to move in with you for a while." Just like that. No question, no discussion. Emily blinked. She didn't react right away. She was used to this, decisions made on her behalf, responsibilities dropped on her lap. They always expected her to say yes, because she always had. But not this time. She looked around the table. Her father, Carl, didn't even glance up from his plate. Jesse didn't acknowledge her at all, just kept scrolling. She knew what they were waiting for: a protest, an argument, the same dance they'd done for years. But Emily smiled. "Of course," she said smoothly. "If it helps Jesse, I don't see why not." For a split second, everyone at the table looked confused. Then relief washed over Carl's face, and Lorraine gave a soft, self-satisfied sigh. Jesse smirked. But none of them asked the obvious question. None of them knew that Emily no longer lived in the condo they were so eager to offer up. She'd moved out weeks ago, quietly, purposefully, and she hadn't told a soul. It hadn't started out as a plan. She just began to pull away. Slowly. No arguments, no dramatic exits. Just small acts of resistance, a delayed reply to a text, a gentle "I'll think about it," instead of an instant yes. She had realized painfully and over time that her family didn't see her as a person with needs and boundaries. She was their solution, their fallback, their backup plan. And when people treat you like a utility, they don't expect permission, they expect access. That was what hit hardest, not just the assumption that Jessie could live in her home, but the complete lack of regard for her as a human being. It wasn't her apartment. It was the family's resource to be shared or handed out as needed. Her quiet space, bought with long hours and financial discipline, was being offered like a spare bedroom at a roadside motel. Emily didn't argue. She didn't explain. Why should she? They hadn't even thought to include her in the decision. So she let them plan, let them box up Jesse's things, let them picture him lounging in her old living room, claiming space he'd never earned. She let it all roll in like watching a storm build from a distance, knowing it wouldn't touch her anymore. And when Saturday came, when the mattress was loaded and Jesse was all packed up, ready to start fresh in a home that no longer belonged to Emily, she took a long, slow walk through her new neighborhood, a latte in hand, the sun warm on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed, voicemails piling up. "There's someone else here," her mother said in a panicked message. "He says he lives in the condo now," Emily smiled. Not cruelly, just quietly. No one asked, she would later tell them. So I didn't say. Because sometimes when people stop seeing you, stop asking you, and just take the kindest thing you can do, is disappear from their plans. Not out of spite, but because peace should never be treated like a community resource. Emily had spent years being the good daughter, the fixer, the fallback. But that night, for the first time, she wasn't any of those things. She was just free. She didn't slam the door. She just stopped answering it. For most of her adult life, Emily Walker had been the glue, quiet, steady, and invisible in all the ways that made her useful. But one evening, sitting alone in the living room of her downtown Seattle condo, she looked at her front door and realized something deeply unsettling. She no longer felt safe in her own home. Not because of crime or strangers or even noise. No, this was different. It was the sinking feeling that at any moment someone in her family could decide her space wasn't truly hers. Her parents, Carl and Lorraine, had always treated her life like it was a shared resource, a backup plan for their chaos and her younger brother Jesse's endless mistakes. Emily had spent over a decade offering help without hesitation. Tuition for Jesse done, a last-minute loan for a car he never paid off handled, a few $1,000s to keep her parents' mortgage afloat, wired without question. She'd said yes so often that she forgot what no even felt like. And yet, when she finally started pulling back, offering softer boundaries, choosing silence over explanations, her family didn't ask why. They just grew colder. They saw her as distant, maybe even ungrateful. But the truth was, Emily had simply started protecting her peace, and for the first time in her life, she realized how valuable that was. So she made a quiet decision. No big blow-up, no dramatic confrontation. One weekday afternoon, Emily met with a realtor. The condo she had poured herself into her refuge, built on spreadsheets, second-hand furniture, and sheer persistence, went on the market. Within weeks, it was sold. The sale wasn't revenge. It was survival. She signed the paperwork with calm hands, then moved across the river into a smaller rental. No skyline view, no statement furniture, just quiet. Peaceful. Hers. She didn't tell anyone. Not out of spite, but because no one asked. No one wondered if she was okay. No one checked in unless they needed something. So Emily stopped volunteering information. She stopped being available like a faucet they could turn on whenever Jesse got into trouble again. And once the condo keys were in the hands of a new owner, Emily finally exhaled. That breath, the one she'd been holding for years, wasn't one of relief. It was one of release. Of course, it didn't take long for the texts to start rolling in. Her mother was so excited to help Jesse move into Emily's place. Her father would start packing. Jesse would bring his own dishes, as if he'd ever used them sober. Emily didn't reply, not because she was playing games, but because they weren't speaking to her. They were speaking to a version of Emily that no longer existed, the obedient daughter, the reliable safety net, the problem solver on call. By Saturday morning, Emily left early. She grabbed a latte, strolled through a local craft fair, and watched the morning sun stretch over the city. Her phone buzzed with missed calls, voicemails full of confusion and panic. "There's someone else here," her mother's voice cracked through one message. "A man says he lives in the condo now. What's going on?" Emily let the silence hang when she finally called back. "I sold it," she said simply. "Weeks ago." Shock, disbelief, accusations. Her family's voices swirled in the background, unable to comprehend a world where Emily had acted independently. "You never said a word," her father barked. "No," Emily replied, "I didn't." Because the moment she started making choices for herself, they stopped listening. They didn't care where she lived, only that her space was available for their next emergency. And now, for once, it wasn't. Emily didn't feel angry. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt done. And in that stillness, no more phone calls, no more footsteps threatening her peace, she realized she hadn't walked away from her family. She'd simply walked toward herself. They thought they had it all figured out until they didn't. Emily Walker didn't argue when her mother Lorraine announced over Sunday dinner that Jesse, her 30-year-old perennially unstable younger brother, would be moving into her condo. They didn't ask. They didn't suggest. They told. And for the first time in a long time, Emily smiled and said, "Sure, if it helps Jesse, I don't see why not." Her mother blinked. Her father Carl let out a long, relieved sigh. Jesse smirked like he'd just pulled off a quiet little victory. None of them noticed the shift. None of them asked the obvious question. Not one of them thought to check whether Emily still lived there, because they weren't used to being questioned. They were used to deciding. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that Emily had sold the condo over a month ago. Quietly, peacefully, no announcement, no permission requested. She'd signed the paperwork, handed over the keys, and stepped into a smaller, quieter apartment across town that actually felt like hers. It hadn't been a scheme. She hadn't done it out of spite. It was self-preservation, plain and simple. After years of being treated like the family's safety net, Emily finally stepped out of the role, so she let them keep talking that week. Her mom sent cheerful texts like, "Let me know if you want me to help clean up before Jesse moves in, and he's bringing his own laundry detergent," as if that would make up for years of leaving messes for others to clean. Her father talked about getting Jesse's things boxed up and ready for the big move. Emily didn't correct them, didn't say a word, because she'd learned something. When people have never really seen you, they build a version of you in their heads, one that doesn't say no, one that always folds, one that keeps showing up no matter the cost. Letting them keep that version while walking away from it herself, that wasn't cruel, that was healing. So Saturday came, the day of the move. Emily didn't answer her phone that morning. She grabbed her coffee and wandered the craft market by the waterfront, sunlight on her shoulders, the breeze on her face. It was the most peaceful she'd felt in years. Her phone buzzed over and over, vibrating like a trapped bird in her purse. By the time she checked it, there were 4 missed calls and a voicemail from Lorraine, her voice brittle, confused, and just a little panicked. "Emily, what's going on?" she said, strained. "There's some man here. He says he lives in your condo, says you don't live here anymore." Emily let the silence stretch out when she finally picked up. She could hear them scrambling in the background, bags, rustling voices rising, Jesse muttering something under his breath. "You never told us," Lorraine snapped. "No," Emily replied calmly. "I didn't." "You lied to us," her father barked. Emily shook her head. "I said if it would help Jesse, I didn't see why not. I never said where." For the first time, the silence wasn't hers to fill. They stood outside a building they thought they owned by extension bags at their feet, dreams of a quiet takeover collapsing right there on the curb. Jesse's voice cracked through next. "So what now? We're just supposed to figure it out." He wasn't yelling. He sounded lost. For a moment, Emily almost softened. Almost. But she didn't. Because for once, they were the ones left to figure it out. She had nothing left to explain, nothing left to give. Let them sit with the consequences of their assumptions. Let them realize that the girl they thought they knew was gone. The door they used to push through without knocking had been closed, and this time it would stay that way. They took it public, so she did. 2. Emily Walker had spent most of her adult life being the dependable one. Not just reliable, but the one everyone leaned on when things went sideways. The one who never asked for thanks, never asked for credit, and certainly never asked to be defended. So, when her family realized they couldn't reach her, that Jessie wouldn't be moving into her now-sold condo, that she'd quietly stepped out of the role they had written for her, the reaction wasn't just disappointment. It was outrage. And in true Walker family fashion, it wasn't handled privately. It started with a voicemail from her mother, Lorraine Sharp and Tremblay. "Your brother is sleeping in his car. Is that what you wanted?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Then came the Facebook post, public, 3 long paragraphs filled with heartbreak emojis and a photo of Jessie as a chubby toddler in overalls. The caption read like a eulogy for a daughter who had gone rogue. "We raised both our children to love and support one another," it began, "but one of them has forgotten that family means showing up when it counts." It went on to paint Emily as selfish, heartless, ungrateful. And worse, people believed it. The likes poured in. The comments multiplied. Cousins she hadn't spoken to in a decade chimed in with judgment. Childhood neighbors commented with concern. People she didn't even recognize shared it, adding their own opinions about how young people today forget where they come from. For a few hours, Emily stared at the screen, stunned but not surprised. Because this was the family pattern: silence her when she served them, shame her when she stopped. But this time, Emily didn't retreat. She responded with facts. No hashtags, no emotional pleas, just screenshots. First, the wire transfer $3,000 to her parents' joint account, sent the year her dad Carl lost his job, and they didn't want Jessie to feel the pressure of having to contribute. Then the car loan document, her name right there, tied to Jessie's vehicle, because his credit was trashed. Followed by the collections notice after he stopped making payments. Next, the lawyer invoice for Jessie's DUI paid in full, by Emily no repayment, not even a thank you. She posted the notarized sale record for the condo with the closing date and transfer of ownership. And finally, she shared a text Jessie had sent her 2 years ago when she first started saying no. "You're a boring robot, Emily. You think you're better than everyone just because you're responsible." Beneath the screenshots, she added a single sentence: "I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped volunteering for emotional debt." And then Emily turned off her phone, not because she was afraid, not because she was hiding, but because for the first time she didn't need the approval or the applause. She didn't need anyone to understand her version of the truth. She knew it. What surprised her, though, was what happened next. Private messages began trickling in, quiet ones, from distant relatives, former classmates, even a few people who had commented on her mom's post earlier. Messages like, "I've been there. Thank you for sharing this. I didn't know. I'm sorry." But Emily hadn't done it to gain sympathy. She shared because she was done being misrepresented, done being rewritten as the villain every time she protected herself. This wasn't vengeance. This was clarity. Her family had made her feel, for years, like silence was her only choice. But now the truth was out, and she had told it calmly, without malice, without drama. Just facts, just boundaries. And for once, the story wasn't being told about her. It was being told by her. Not every door needs to stay open. That night after the confrontation, Emily Walker sat alone in her new apartment, wrapped in a silence she hadn't felt in years. Not the tense, stifling silence that had crept through her old condo every time her family crossed a boundary. No, this was a peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that fills a space that finally belongs to you. Earlier that day, her parents had shown up at her door. Somehow, they'd found her new address. Lorraine had come armed with guilt while Carl hovered in the background, his voice rising as he accused her of betrayal. Jessie stood there, too, looking stunned, like someone had moved the finish line and forgot to tell him. Emily had expected them to come. She knew her mother well enough to know that control doesn't slip easily from her hands. So when the knock came, 3 sharp, tight raps, Emily was already waiting by the peephole. "Do you know what people are going to say about you?" Lorraine hissed. "Do you even care?" Emily stood steady. "Yes," she said. "They'll say I finally stopped opening the door." That stunned her mother, not into rage, but into silence. "You used to be kind," Lorraine whispered. Emily didn't flinch. "You used to notice when I was in pain. It wasn't an argument. It was a boundary finally spoken out loud." 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled quietly up to the curb. A calm female officer stepped out, approached the group, and asked Emily what was going on. When she confirmed that the people outside had no permission to be there, the officer turned to them clear and firm. "This is her home. You need to leave." Carl tried to argue. "She's our daughter. This is a family matter." But the officer remained steady. "It's still her residence. And you're trespassing." Jesse clenched his jaw. "You're going to regret this," he spat. "No," Emily said, stepping back inside. "I've regretted almost everything until this moment." When the door closed behind her, it felt final, but not cruel. Just necessary. That night, the phone didn't buzz. No voicemails, no chaos waiting in her inbox. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the baseboards, the quiet rhythm of her own breathing. She made a cup of chamomile tea, not to calm herself down, not to lull herself to sleep, but for the simple ritual, for the comfort of doing something just for herself. She wrapped her hands around the mug and let the steam rise like a small kind of forgiveness. Not for them, for herself. The next morning, the calls came, 12 of them, 5 from Lorraine, 2 from Carl, the rest from numbers she didn't recognize, probably cousins or family friends who'd seen her mother's Facebook post and decided to pile on. But Emily didn't answer. She scrolled through the messages, read them, without reacting. The guilt was thick. Why would you do this to your own brother? Your mother is devastated. Jesse is sleeping in his car. Are you happy now? She didn't reply. She didn't owe anyone that. She had learned after years of bending and breaking that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-erasure. And she was done disappearing in the name of loyalty. She blocked her mother's number, then Jesse's, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because not every door deserves to be knocked on forever. As she stepped onto the balcony that morning, a gentle breeze met her face. Down on the street, life moved along slow and steady. A couple walking a dog, a neighbor carrying groceries, a man in an oversized coat waving from below. Emily waved back, not out of obligation, just because she could. Emily Walker didn't storm out of her family's life. She simply stepped out of the role they cast her in. For years she had been the helper, the fixer, the one who said yes even when it hurt. But when she stopped, when she finally said no, the silence that followed wasn't rejection. It was peace. She realized that her worth didn't come from how much she could sacrifice or how many problems she could solve. It came from being a whole person with needs of her own. Setting boundaries didn't make her cold. It made her free. And in choosing that freedom, she wasn't walking away from love. She was walking toward it, the kind rooted in honesty, not obligation. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for others is to stop trying to earn love by being useful. True love doesn't demand burnout. It doesn't guilt you into silence. It holds space for your no just as much as your yes. If you've spent a lifetime putting yourself last to keep the peace, let this be your reminder. Peace that costs your sanity isn't peace, it's quiet compliance. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to outgrow a role that was never really yours. Have you ever had to make the hard call to step back from family or people who only saw your usefulness? What moment helped you reclaim your peace? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in rewriting your story, one honest boundary at a time, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone anymore.